Okay, 3 different types of paint. A tube paint, a fluid paint, and a pigment. I tried to get as close as I could. Both of these are carbon black, and this one is a pearl black. The pigment is a special case by itself, so we're going to handle that last. The fluid paint, that takes a little bit of trick too, so we're going to talk about that as we get started. So we're going to start out with the tube paint. Tube paint is the easiest of the paints to get started. So let me pull together some containers and we'll be ready to go. Okay, first container is my Amsterdam Amsterdam carbon black, and carbon black is one of my go-to colors for my cell activator, so I thought it'd be good to have also as a demonstration. I'll put it together as a paint. I'm not going to do a lot of this paint because I don't use a lot of black in my paintings. Pillow paint, yes. Cell activator, yes. But as a color, not usually. So I'm going to put down just a dab. And I want to show you what I mean by a dab. I mean, it's not much at all. It's not much at all. So as we get started here, you'll have an idea, and I'll try to keep things consistent across the board. I'm going to be using my Infinity Bare 8300 Josonia mix. That's 2 parts Infinity, 1 part Bare 8300, and 1 part Josonia varnish. Okay, this is one of my 2 pouring mediums that I use, and it's what I currently have going. So so I can keep this consistent, you use a measuring spoon. Usually I just eyeball this. It is roughly 3 parts of my pouring medium to 1 part paint. But like with everything in fluid art, it has to be felt. It's not just a recipe to get the results. And depending what kind of style you're working with, you want your paints to be different thicknesses. If I were a Dutch pour artist, which I've done in the past, and I love Dutch pours, my paints would be much, much thinner, and I'd mix them differently. But in the style that I do, which is the Sheleeartstyle, it is more important that the paints be more consistent across each one of the colored layers. So here we go. I'm going to just mix that. This is just 3 parts, roughly 3 parts pouring medium to 1 part paint. Now I'm going to just mix. Until it's incorporated. It doesn't take time. It doesn't take a lot of time. You really want to take your time in mixing, because it doesn't matter what you do, you're going to introduce bubbles into your paint, and they're not our friend more times than not. Now, when I get this finished, because of the consistency of the original starting point, this is going to be much thicker than I'm going to be able to use on a canvas. So I'll show you that in just a second. See if you can see from that direction. It doesn't even want to come off of my spoon. It's very glumpy. So what I do in that case is I add a little bit of my, what some people like to call the Josonia water mix. You hear different varying amounts that people use. Some people go 50-50. Some people go much less or much more. This is for me 90% Josonio varnish and 10% water. And the whole point is I don't want to induce too much water to my paint. It degrades the pigment, in my opinion, and I get a better, smoother finish when I don't degrade that pigment down. And what will happen is there's lots of things that happen, but the pigment will fracture, and you'll see that in a lot of paintings when you're first starting, that you get these where the paint actually starts looking grainy, and that is because the pigment was degraded to the point where the actual powders were allowed to separate from the binders. That's the reason why I don't use a lot of water. It's still a little thick. This is an eyeball thing. Not much there. I don't think I even put a quarter of a teaspoon in there. Little will go a long way. And once it gets close, it happens really very quickly. And what I'm doing here is I'm watching, and I'm feeling how the back of my spoon is going through the paint. Yes. So it's a lot of this is feel. So you can see where I'm at. Yeah, a little bit better. It's a little bit better, but as you can see, it's still pretty gloopy. A little bit more. Again, maybe a quarter of a teaspoon, give or take. I am introducing because I'm pushing this process, introducing quite a bit of air bubbles to my paint. That's a good thing, bad thing. Mostly a bad thing. So a little bit more Dosonia, little tiny bit. That was even less than a quarter. Sides, make sure you get all the paint incorporated. And what I'll do with this, I would never use this on the day, unless I was just impatient, on the day that I was getting ready to paint. I'd want to let it sit overnight. It gets a chance to, it's getting better, gives it a chance to settle the bubbles out. And in the case of the pigments, which we'll talk about in a minute, allow the pigments that didn't get, they'll let them get wet enough and actually loosen up a little bit. Talk about that in a moment. Mixing paints is as much of an art as putting the paint down on canvas. Now, I practice getting closer, practice the Sheleeart technique. You can see that it's pretty good consistency. This is a little on the thickish side, but I think we're going to let that go. And if you look down here in black, it's very hard to see. If you look down there, you can see that it goes a mound on a mound, which is a little bit more than I want, but we'll roll with it for now. And you do that till you have the consistency you're looking for. Okay, the second one we're going to do is the fluid. Now, this, shake it because the pigment does settle to the bottom, and it has a little marble in it that helps with the agitation, helps to mix it back up a little bit. Now, I'm going to put in the same amount. This will go a very, very long distance. This is golden high flow acrylic. It is opaque, which means it does not it's very dense, doesn't allow a lot of light through it. I'm sure there's better ways to describe that, but it is basically what it is. Now this is a fluid paint. That's basically liquid. So I put in ish about the same amount. Now I'm going to put the same amount of pouring medium in with this. We'll just call this a part. It's technically a tablespoon, but we'll just call it a part. The first part I put down was basically a teaspoon. This is 3 parts then to the 1 part. Okay, now we're ready to mix. Because it was a fluid to start with, it's going to be much thinner than what we had. So I may have to actually add a little pouring medium to this to have it the right consistency. When you're working with this, you want your consistencies to be the same across the board. This is incorporating much quicker. And you can see I would add just a little bit more because it's kind of on the thinnish side. So I'm not going to add much. I'm going to add maybe a dollop, half a teaspoon-ish. Just enough to get it thickened up a bit. And I about did it. So you can see that it's nice and smooth off the back of the spoon. It has a nice consistency, trails off nice. So I would say that's fairly close to where I want it to be. Yeah, you have to always eyeball these. Okay, there's the second one. Now, this is not a carbon black like the two were here. It's just as close as I get as far as a pigment goes. Now, pigments are a different beast altogether. You need to pay attention to the amount of pigment you put in, and you need to make sure that the powder gets wet, that all of the pigments are allowed to turn into a fluid. When I'm finished with this first part, it'll basically be at the point that the point that the high flow acrylic was. At least that's the goal. So put this over here. I'm going to shut up for a little while because really I should not work with pigment without a respirator on. Pigments are they go airborne very quickly. It's a powder. It's a micro powder. And when you do this, as you can see, it's a powder. I don't really want to do too much of that. I'm going to add approximately, that's an approximation of a half teaspoon. Close this back up. Okay, at this form, it is dry. So I can't just add the pouring medium in here. I need to loosen it up a bit. So I would normally add just the Josonia. This is Josonia varnish, and this is a gloss varnish. So it's going to keep the paint. It's going to make the paint. The amount of shine that I'm looking for. But mostly I'm looking for the, with this, to allow the pigment to get wet. You're going to see I didn't add that much there. Don't want to go too far overboard. You just want to get them, wet. So I'm going to do this very carefully and probably hold my breath a little bit. So if I stop talking, you'll understand. Very slowly. You don't want to make those powders airborne. Use a respirator, it's not a problem. You can even use one of the N95 face masks. Anything to protect your lungs. These are made of mica. Mica is a sort of, it's a mineral stone, and it will cause you problems if you do it too often. Notice I am not, still even at this point, not overdoing. I just want to make sure I get all my pigments mixed up. Ideally, for me, when I'm mixing pigments, I will mix them the day before I mix my paints, because I want them to have enough time to relax, to become more of a fluid. And if I were to show you this right now, you would still see the grains. You would still see the grains within the pigment. This is a pearlescent white, excuse me, pearlescent black. It's a beautiful paint. I would use this in a paint, in a pour. Black is not my go-to color. I'm still seeing quite a bit of grain in there, but I think I'm going to have to roll with it. If I don't get it, it's okay, because it's going to get mixed. It's going to get mixed as every time I pull this paint out. Now let's add our tablespoon. This is basically the equivalent of what I had with the fluid. So we're back to having a fluid, and we proceed the same way. It's about consistency. That's a tablespoon. Don't want to contaminate my pouring medium with black. Now, just like I did with the fluid pigment, I'm going to slowly incorporate the pouring medium with the black, with the pigment. Now this is not going to be as black as what the other two were, because it has more of the mica has more of a pearlesque, but you get the idea. Scrape on the sides. Everything in there, both the pouring medium and the pigment. Okay. You can see this consistency, still a little bit thin. Comes off the spoon. So let's add a little bit more pouring medium. Again, about a half a teaspoon. about did it. Okay. Nice and smooth off the spoon. You can see that it does a nice job of. So that's pretty close. I'm still seeing grains in there. I'll come back tomorrow and give it another good stir, which puts us back another day. But that is basically it. That's the pigment. That's the high flow. And that is the toothpaste. So, if I were to put them side by side, pigment, high flow, toothpaste. Kind of the same. Pretty close at least. I hope this has been useful for you. If you have any questions or any comments, I'd invite you to leave those down in the comments section. I leave all of the products that I used today in the description below. I am a practitioner of the Sheleeartstyle, and I will tell you that although I'm showing you how I do things here, it is not necessarily the only way you could do things. For me, going to the source was the best thing I could have done, and there is down in my description below and I have a 15% off coupon code. I am in no way sponsored by any of my products, and it's just things that I use and things that I find work extremely well, and I hope they're useful to you. So I wish you a good day, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for coming along. Bye now.